Good afternoon. I'm Jack Galmish, the President and CEO of the Nine Network of Public Media, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this year's Saigh Symposium. We are so pleased to be part of the Saigh Symposium for the second year that we've been requested to host this event, and honored that the Saigh organization in Wyman has chosen us to be part of this event in support of the young people of our region. In the past 2 weeks, we celebrated our 60th anniversary here at the Nine Network. And the founders of the Nine Network, when they created this institution, it was known as Educational Television. And it was devoted to education and civil discourse. And I think an event like this afternoon is the combination of that in its greatest embodiment. So we're so pleased to have all of you with us. Over these 60 years, we've continued to broaden from our customary role as a high-quality television program provider to an organization that is truly outwardly focused, listening to our community and bringing together the community to address key issues that impact our region. And now, more than ever, there's a need for our community and in our community to work together to help young people succeed. As many of you are aware, the Nine Network of Public Media developed American Graduate, which is a national initiative to create awareness, understanding, and action for improving the lives of young people throughout our region and throughout our country. It's a significant undertaking with more than 75 public media organizations participating around the United States and more than 1,000 partners across the country. All of us are addressing important issues at the heart of our work, and we do this by working with a strong network of community partners like Wyman. We create and distribute content that helps connect to the broader community and bring together the region in a conversation about what's good for all young people. And we're pleased that the Nine Network has been chosen to lead this American Graduate effort just recently for the next phase, which will include a period of over 2 years. This past week, Amy Shaw and our entire American Graduate team, we were in Washington, D.C. to work with a new group of 33 of the largest public television stations in our country to develop this work and to, again, improve outcomes, not only of youth in our region, but across the U.S. Today, I'm pleased to share with you the fact that recently in our business, kind of the Emmy Awards are one of those marks where we receive some recognition for our work. And I'm so pleased that the Nine Network received the Mid-America Regional Emmy for our community service, which honors a body of work around American Graduate. And Amy will show this to you. We're very proud of this. And the reason we're showing this... And the reason we're sharing this with you is that the Emmy Awards, if you've ever gone to one of these, they go on for what seems like days, okay? And it seems like everyone is getting an Emmy for something, but truly there's only 3 Emmys that are awarded to television stations. And by the way, the Mid-America Emmys comprise Missouri and a 4-state area. So this is a significant group of television stations, commercial and public. And in all of that, one of those station awards is for community service, and we're so pleased that American Graduate was recognized, and so pleased that many of you have been on that journey with us, and that there's a piece of many of you in this award that we received. So thank you for all of you to share that honor with us. So our work here in St. Louis continues to be a model for the work of other public television stations and organizations across the country. And again, we're so proud that this work is really dedicated to working to help young people become academically, socially, emotionally, and culturally prepared to be contributors to our community and to our country. It's an exciting journey that we're on together, and on behalf of the Nine Network, I'm so pleased to be working with all of you and thrilled about our conversation today. Again, thanks to all of you who are with us.
Thank you, Jack, and the entire 9 Network team for the very warm welcome, for hosting us today in this amazingly beautiful space, but most importantly, for your bold leadership in really stepping forward with the American Graduate Initiative, both here in St. Louis and on behalf of our nation. So thank you all. We appreciate it. I'm Allison Williams, and as Senior Vice President of Programs at Wyman, I have the honor of leading Wyman's staff team, as well as our 61 partners across the country who provide positive teen development services and programs to nearly 35,000 young people in this nation on a daily basis. At Wyman, we believe that every young person, regardless of circumstances, should be supported and expected to thrive in life, in learning, and in work. Our vision is to really build communities where this is possible, and our hope and intent with the conversation today and with your engagement is to add to that community discourse. On behalf of Wyman and our Board of Trustees, we'd like to first thank our sponsors, the S.A.F.E Foundation. This is our 5th annual S.A.F.E Symposium, so it's very exciting. The Incarnate Word Foundation and the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University. We'd like to thank our moderator that you'll meet in just a moment, Dr. Amanda Moore McBride, our 3 panelists, Dr. Dale Blythe, Hannah Baptiste, and Hassan Davis. We had the pleasure of having lunch with these 4 individuals, and I think you're in for a real treat today. We'd like to thank you all, our audience members, for taking time out of what we know are extraordinarily busy schedules to really sit for a moment, to pause, to engage, to think about young people, and to think about our work together. Speaking of young people, we want to thank our young people. If you're a young person in the audience from a Wyman program, hold up your hands. Give them a big thanks. We cannot and should not have conversations about you without you, and we're very glad that you're with us today. We'd also like to thank those joining us via live stream right now. So we have followers of the American Graduate Initiative, we have Wyman's partners from across the country, and we have special guests in Chicago, Illinois from the Donors Forum. Their social and emotional learning work group, a group of funders, are gathered together in Chicago, Illinois, watching this as well. In St. Louis, as in many other communities, we've really begun to think about progress for young people as a shared community responsibility, as a shared community outcome. We've started to take action around collective impact on behalf of young people and envision a connected community effort to effectively support young people from cradle all the way through career. As we consider the well-being of young people and what it takes to truly provide these types of supports, we often focus first and foremost on safety. Clearly, we want young people to have full stomachs. We want them to have appropriate shelter. We want them to be free from harm and physical illness. We often then focus on the academics. We want young people to be able to read, to write well, to do their mathematics, to move through grade levels effectively, to graduate from high school, to go on to school beyond high school and finish from college, university, vocational training. And finally, we often focus on those bumps in the road that can get in their way. Alcohol, tobacco, drugs, self-harm, suicide, teen pregnancy violence, just to name a few. All of those are absolutely critical. They're absolutely important, and our community should continue to stay the path around all of those areas. And, not but there's an area that we often overlook that's a critical building block that cuts across all of those places and spaces to ensure young people's success, and that's the proactive, intentional, and ongoing from cradle to career development of social and emotional skills. That's what our conversation is about this afternoon. In St. Louis, the recent events in Ferguson have truly stopped us in our tracks. The voices of many, both here locally as well as around the country, have joined in a conversation in the search for real and lasting community solutions. I recently watched a piece from the 9 Network where young people in our community were interviewed for their perspectives, their point of view, their solutions, to listen to their emotions, their pain, their reactions to what had happened in our community. And one young woman named Morgan was particularly poignant, and she really brought this conversation to a very fundamental and very personal level when she commented, "As a whole, I feel like a lot of people lack empathy. They have no desire to put themselves in someone else's shoes." With this incredibly complex and dynamic community situation, Morgan challenges us to remember this most basic of human connections and understanding. So today's Saigh Symposium begins to get at Morgan's comment. It helps us think about how we ensure intentionally as a community we're helping young people develop social and emotional skills like empathy, like the ability to take civic action, like the ability to think about others beyond themselves. And we're having this symposium at a time when three realities are converging. First, research is becoming extraordinarily clear that social emotional learning matters. It makes a difference for young people. You'll hear Dr. Blythe speak to that. Second, we know that in whatever capacity folks work with young people, whether you're at the early childhood end of the continuum, whether you're working in post-secondary, helping young people access college and stay in college, whether you're working in foster care, juvenile justice, our elementary school system, more and more we're realizing that social and emotional learning is a part of all of that. So it's truly a thread that connects all of our fields in terms of youth development and youth support together. And finally, you'll hear about funders and policymakers thinking more and more and more about this. If this is such a critical area, if it's the thread that ties us together, if it can impact young people so powerfully, how do we need to start thinking about that in terms of our overall strategy and our overall supports? So for those reasons, we bring you today's conversation. It's now my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Moore McBride. Amanda will moderate today's conversation. She's the Betty Bofinger Brown Associate Professor and Associate Dean at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University, as well as the Director for the Richard A. Gephardt Institute of Public Service. Amanda has been a very valued thought and research partner for Wyman and for many in the community and field, and we're glad to have her with us today. Amanda?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Allison, so much for your leadership. On behalf of the George Warren Brown School of Social Work, we're so grateful for how you've changed the community conversation and how you've pushed us to really understand collective impact in the arena of children, youth, and families. We're also grateful for the Saigh Foundation. I said earlier today that this has become, as a fifth annual event, a wonderful opportunity for us as practitioners to push pause. Isn't it great to just take some time out to pull our heads up above our practice and to intentionally think about what we're doing and how we can do it in the best way possible? So thank you to the Saigh Foundation for making that happen for us. I would like to frame our remarks from this perspective. There's a diverse audience here, online, and in other spaces that are going to participate in this. All of you come from different settings. You're approaching youth and family issues from different interventions, different perspectives. But the one thing we do all have in common is that we're invested in the success of children and youth. But are we making the right investments? Are we focusing on the right levers that will switch these life trajectories of our young people, especially those from the most challenged circumstances? Today, we focus on a lever, social emotional learning, that may make a big difference. I'm a social scientist, and I have purposely chosen to approach my work as a developmentalist. That means I don't focus on the problems to be solved. Instead, I focus on states or conditions to be achieved. And when I look at social emotional learning, what I see is an approach that has the potential to produce multiple positive outcomes, which then themselves produce multiple positive outcomes. It is actually a multiplier. Yet, we're still not really sure what it is and how we, from our various perspectives, as funders, as policymakers, as practitioners, as academics, should approach this. So what we've done today is assemble a panel of experts who can help us understand the definitional and conceptual issues, the research that's been brought to bear to this point, different strategies that we can use to spread this through our communities. Dr. Dale Blythe is from the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota, where he's an extension professor in the Howland Endowed Chair in Youth Leadership Development. He's also a senior research fellow at the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement. I joked at lunch today that he's an academic with lots of street credibility. He's had an incredible professional pathway that has put him on the front lines of practice, and that informs his research. He will present a wide overview of this field, and I think about today's panel almost like a funnel, and he's at the top part. Hannah Baptiste is Program Associate at the Susan Crown Exchange. Hannah will expand our views on when and how social and emotional learning may be pursued, especially from the perspective of a foundation or those investors that are trying to change ecosystems and context, not just program by program, but really changing communities. And then Hassan Davis is former commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice and a lifelong advocate in this space. Hassan will focus our attention on one specific population and the benefits that can accrue by treating that population from a social and emotional learning perspective. So as moderator, I've just introduced our panelists, but I want to own the space that's between them and you. So we have our in-studio audience, we have live stream audience, and then we also have those on social media. And it's this exchange between the two of you that's important. So our syllabus for today, if you will, is that they will each talk in turn. They're being timed. And then we want to leave plenty of space for conversation. And that conversation can be fed in multiple ways. There will be questions taken from the live studio audience, but then also through Twitter. So this is one of those rare instances. You turn off your ringer, but you don't turn off your phone. And you utilize the hashtag American Graduate. We're so grateful to be under that larger banner and pulling in a much wider audience in that way. We hope that what you experience today is actually a call to action. I think social emotional learning in many ways has been treated as a nicety, a nice byproduct of other interventions. But instead, I think what you'll hear today is that it deserves a central role in our approaches. So please consider the implications today, not only for yourself, but your organization, as well as our region. So please join me in welcoming our panel and Dr. Blythe.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor. And go Cardinals. I want to talk about 4 lessons from research that are emerging and quite clear. First lesson is social emotional learning is meaningful. A lot of things we can talk about that sound meaningful, but this is particularly meaningful. It's meaningful because social emotional factors shape a lot of what happens in learning and other contexts. They shape whether youth see a point to learning. If youth don't have hope, the likelihood of them putting a lot of time into learning or their own development is not very high. These factors shape what youth bring to learning, the kind of mindset they bring, whether they bring a mindset that says, I can do this, I can work out, I can solve the problem, or I'm not good at math, therefore I shouldn't take another math course. They shape what youth do while they're learning, how well they're able to self-control, control their emotions, use their emotions to advance their learning rather than get in the way of their learning. They shape how you deal with others while they're learning, from teamwork to social skills. These are the kind of skills in particular that businesses are very interested in getting more and more of, sometimes called 21st century skills. And they shape whether youth persist in learning and stay on their path toward their goal. We're learning more and more that simply being good at something is often not as important as being persistent in something. You can probably think of areas of your life where you thought you were pretty good, but you ran into a really tough problem. And if you couldn't work through it, you sort of said, well, maybe I'm not good in that area. But that's not necessarily the case. It's persistence that really often wins out. So the thing I would say is that social emotional factors and social emotional learning are both means to valued ends, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but also valuable ends in themselves. These are things that young people and adults use every day of their life in every aspect of their life. And yet we pay far too little attention to them in helping young people, supporting young people in learning and developing the kind of skills that matter. And that's 2 factors in this that I want to sort of language that you'll often hear that I want you to understand but not use. So these are sometimes called the non-cognitive skills. And what that means is they're not the academic skills. They're not the reading, writing, and math. The thing we don't want to use this word is the only thing that's non-cognitive about a human being is when they're dead. If you're dead, then you have non-cognitive states. But if you're alive, you have cognitive states, and it affects your emotions, it affects your relationships, it affects everything you do. And so these are cognitive skills. They're just a different type of cognitive skills. And the other thing that's often used is soft skills. These are somehow softer than the hard skills. The things that really matter is usually the implication. And what we're finding increasingly from research is the opposite. It's the cognitive but not soft skills, the social emotional learning skills that really matter. And so don't buy into the notion of lesser when we talk about these things. Second lesson from the research is that social emotional learning matters. I mean, I have many studies, a variety of different types that show various aspects of social emotional learning, that's what SEL means in the abbreviations, predict valued outcomes, achievement, health outcomes, college and career success, reduce problem behaviors, disciplinary issues in school, a wide variety of the kinds of things we either want more of or want less of for our young people in terms of their actions, their behavior, their lives, are predicted by social emotional learning. We also have a smaller number of studies that are starting to show that when you deliberately work with a young person on social emotional skills, when you deliberately create an environment where social emotional learning is valued and talked about, that you see increases in the skills and you see increases in the good stuff and decreases in the bad stuff, which I'll show you in a couple slides in a minute. And we also know that people are increasingly seeing the importance of these things. Businesses in particular are starting to say, these are the kinds of skills that we need in employees. You can fill them up with all the content you want, but we can do that in the workplace too. What we can't do as easily is help them develop these kind of skills, in part because these skills accumulate over time. They're as a result of life experiences, not just what you've learned in the last course. Here's a simple example. The green bar, this is college students. They measured how hopeful they were when they started college. Their grade point average at the end of college, people who started out with high hope had a higher grade point average than those people who had low hope. If you look at it in terms of what else happened, 25% of the low hope students were dismissed out of college because they got poor grades, versus only 7% in the green bar of the high hope students. And similarly, high school or college graduation, significantly different, 17-point difference. All just on whether these young people entered school in college hopeful. Now, hopeful is not an attitude you can teach and sort of say, okay, you're going to now be hopeful. It's kind of like the old self-esteem thing. You always try to make kids feel good about themselves. A lot of what we learned about that, if it's not earned, it doesn't matter. If you don't feel good about yourself because you've accomplished something, you don't, in fact, get much value, benefit from it. So again, in general, this good science links social emotional learning to the following. Student gains in a bunch of areas, the positive areas, and reduce risks for failure in everything from conflict behavior to aggression to emotional distress. What you want when you look at something, a lever, the way you were talking about it, what you want on a lever is something that when you push it, the right things go up and the wrong things go down. And this is one of those levers. We also know that leaders are increasingly, this is surveys done in Minnesota, out-of-school time leaders and education leaders, superintendents and building principals. And it's a statement about how strongly do you agree with the notion that social emotional learning is critical to academic performance. It's critical in a lot of ways, but it's a critical academic. 95, 96% of the leaders said, yes, it is critical. The same leaders often don't have it central to their mission. It's one of our issues, particularly education leaders. Third lesson, social emotional learning is measurable. And this is important because if you can't measure it, it's hard to know whether you're moving it. So again, these are not soft skills. They are not things that can't be. Soft skills is often used to say, oh, you can't measure that. And it's a way to sort of put it down or put it aside. These are things you can measure. There are now many dimensions, too many dimensions. It's getting confusing, frankly. And there's a lot of ways to measure them, from self-reports to ratings to observations. And those ways of measuring can be very useful in a variety of ways, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. So there are several tools that exist, and more are emerging every day. More of the tools right now have been useful for research, for studying the relationships. Less of them have been useful from a perspective of either accountability, are we moving it, or, in my opinion, more importantly, from an improvement perspective. Can we see what things we can improve? What does this tell us about what I might do differently tomorrow in my practice, in my life? This is an example of a measure. It's called the Holistic Student Assessment. It's by Pear, a program for education after school and resiliency out of Harvard. And so the students take these surveys, and they end up getting a score back that the teacher or the youth worker could use, the educator could use with them. This is a 7th grade female example. What you see is here in the green bar here that this young lady is higher than usual on academic motivation. That's an asset you can start working with them on. She's struggling a little with her bonding to school, how close she feels to school. Could be school's not very welcoming, could be a lot of things. And her critical thinking is a little lower than it might be. So those are areas you want to improve. You can look at their relationships, relationship with peers and a relationship with adults. In her case, are a little bit above average. Over here, it's interesting. These are the sort of more resiliency, social emotional things. Here you see a young woman who's got some strengths in it, her action orientation and her assertiveness, but not too good of emotional control. You can imagine what the combination of being action-oriented, assertive, and not in emotional control could lead to. But she's also optimistic out here. So you can see about this kind of data that a teacher or a person working with this young person could say, and they could work on them with the young person. This is not a score that you keep secret from the young person, but when you answer a question, this is the type of thing you talked about. If you go to the next slide, these are the same kind of data, but now it's on Mr. or Mrs. McCarthy's 5th grade class, and you get a pyramid that says how many of the kids in my class are in that first tier where they're pretty solid. They got a pretty solid foundation on these things. How many are struggling a little bit, maybe need some kind of extra support, and how many may need some type of an intervention, that they're really in a situation which is not going to be ideal for them to keep progressing in their learning and development. And you get a sense of, in the class has a little more trouble with assertiveness. I think that's a role for the previous student to help out on. But they're good on reflection. So how do you use a class that's good on reflection to build other skills around social emotional learning? And then it talks about different challenges and stuff. But it's an idea of the kind of data you get. Individual, classroom, different ways of talking about it. The next example is a very different example. This is from Vancouver, British Columbia, where every young person in the community does the Middle Childhood Development Index. And this is a map of the neighborhoods in Vancouver. And the colors of the neighborhoods are socioeconomic status. So the darker blue are the higher socioeconomic, the very lightest blue are the lowest socioeconomic. And what you see in the pie is the percentage of kids who are thriving, who their well-being, they're generally doing well. It's kind of like the bottom of the pyramid in the earlier one. And what you see is that it varies. It's not always it's often the high socioeconomic areas that have a larger green wedge, but it's not always. Here's the one that's in a more moderate, what this data does, this data never gets back to an individual kid, it never gets back to an individual parent. It's about how do we as a community want to deal with the fact that we have significant wedges of kids who aren't thriving, aren't doing well. And how do you mobilize the community around it? This is, again, just a slide showing that here, this is an important difference from the earlier slide in that here we're now seeing that they were actually able to change the social-emotional skills. So it's not only, it's starting to be on the side of malleable, is what I'm going to talk about. But you still see the right things going up and the wrong things going down. Let me go back a slide. Malleable is the 4th M. It means that it's changeable. Too often we tend to think of these as personality kind of characters, and they're not personality characteristics. They're very malleable. And even when they're more sort of settled, we're finding that there's a variety of skills you can use to adjust that. So even if you're a very impulsive person, there's ways you can learn to slow down that impulse and think before you act. Other thing I wanted to say there is the last one. It's important to remember that social emotional skills are both taught and caught. That is, they are both things that you can teach people, but they are also things that you catch every day. So if you're in an environment that's teaching you to be quiet and calm, that might work. But if the teacher flies off the handle every 5 minutes, the lesson is going to be, watch out for she's in a bad mood. And so it's caught and taught. It's not just one or the other. These are the kind of criteria that their studies have shown make a difference in the kind of programs. So programs that are active are sequenced step by step. They're active. They focus on social emotional learning, and they're explicit about it. They target specific kind of skills. This shows the evidence on that. I won't talk about that. And then lastly, we're starting to understand that one of the implications for action from all this research is that you've got to move away from sort of putting them in a program and expecting the program to make a difference, and moving to more of a strategies approach that looks at how we change the context, how we change the adults in the context, how we work with young people on these areas. And that includes some of the kind of approaches that are noted below. In short, our fundamental problem in social emotional learning is we're not intentional enough about developing it in all the various ways we could. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you don't mind if I sit while I give my presentation. So Dale actually gave me a good segue into my section, which is all about how our grant-making approach at Susan Crown Exchange is focusing on moving from SEL-based programs to SEL strategies that can really be scalable. So before I get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about SE. SE is a Chicago-based foundation that was founded in 2009 by Susan Crown. And it was all about a way to find more deep and strategic approaches to transforming the way education looks in the 21st century. So about a year ago, we dove into this space of social and emotional learning, but it didn't exactly start that way. We actually first started with the question of why do some young people thrive despite adversity while others don't? And we wondered if there might be pivotal moments or transformational experiences that really made a difference in young people's lives. So in the course of our research and exploration into this space and into what youth development and education systems have had to say about that, we kind of realized a few key things. That it's not just academic achievement that makes a difference for young people. It's skills like agency, resilience, grit, emotion management, and responsibility that are really drivers of success. And beyond just the traditional success, it drives sort of helping to young people to create meaningful lives and to develop their own life paths. So actually going back just a little bit, so we ended up defining our grant-making approach around how do you make that shift to help people understand that SEL can be a part of our infrastructure and how we deliver services to young people. But we also realized that there are a lot of systemic challenges in the way of getting to that place. For one, the demands for life success have shifted, but education systems have not. Youth development systems have not. And we're well-intentioned, but our systems are just simply overwhelmed and underperforming. So our grant-making focus around SEL was really about expanding the definition of success to include social and emotional learning while understanding that we have to operate within these systems that are to some extent flawed and struggling. So we're looking at how we can do that within these systems. So SEE's investment approach has been to first identify the best approaches in social and emotional learning, which involves understanding that it's not one lesson or curriculum. It's also about elevating the practices. So once we understand what those strategies are, how do we make it so that we shine the light on those? And also understand that it's idiosyncratic. One approach might work for Jenny, but it might not work for John. So how do we have an understanding about that? And how do we also then take that to scale? So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about our first program in this space called the Social and Emotional Learning Challenge, which really gets at each of these levers. So the Social and Emotional Learning Challenge really is an initiative that brings together 8 program experts from different organizations around the country, some in theater, some in outward bound, sort of outdoor exploration programs, some that focus on arts, and even Wyman's own top program is a member of this cohort. And what it does is it brings them together with researchers who then can codify their best practices and distill them into a guide for more practitioners to scale this across systems more broadly. And we focused this work specifically on teenagers because we saw that it's, first of all, it's the most pivotal stage after infancy. Young people, adolescents, between 13 and 18, their brains are rapidly developing. And it's a very important stage where you can have these transformational experiences and these pivotal moments that really shift you from potentially these paths that are going down negative ways to more positive paths. And we also saw that there was a real need to focus on teenagers because a lot of the skilled interventions focus more punitively. So we wanted to take an approach that would be more holistic. And we also chose after school time because we saw that these are often the third spaces for young people where they go and they really feel like they have a venue outside of school and outside of home where they can vent, where they have that caring adult, they have the peers to count on. So we saw it as an opportunity for this sector, which knows so much about positive youth development, which really operates on a lot of these best practices but hasn't yet named them. We saw that as a chance to sort of shine a light on that and allow this sector to inform other youth-serving sectors. So really the project is a research project. It brings together researchers from the Weikart Center, which focuses on youth program quality, with the 8 programs that I mentioned, through a year-long process of studying their management practices, studying youth behavior change after a year in their program contexts, and looks at the staff practices. And so instead of doing a traditional research project, we decided to go this route of selecting partners through a competitive process because we wanted to discover unlikely partners. We wanted to see SEL broadly defined. You tell us what that means to you. Tell us what impact you're having. And we wanted to directly we wanted to directly fund this impactful work and really shine a light on exceptional players who might not have been recognized as doing SEL if we'd gone a different route. And one of the drawbacks to approaching it in that way was that we have to accept a very pluralistic definition of social and emotional learning. Because one thing we're not trying to do is be prescriptive. As Dale was saying, there's so many different ways of talking about SEL. And we're not really so much focused on the morass. We're focused on sort of honing in the energy, which is that people really care right now about taking it past the promise of helping young people develop and really toward the outcomes of what it means to develop skills like agency, grit, and resilience. So our project was all about letting our partners define what that meant on their own terms, and also taking the outcomes beyond just academics. So we care about SEL, obviously, because it helps young people in terms of traditional academic success, but it also helps them, like I said before, develop their own sense of agency and meaning in life. And it also helps in a lot of wellness indicators. And overall, the project is really about deferring to the expert, the youth workers themselves. So rather than having researchers sort of dictate the agenda from the top down, we have the practitioners tell us, so what are the strategies that work for you? What are the ways that this might make sense to other practitioners so that we can really scale these strategies and make them portable across systems? How can we move our systems from focusing on box programs that you can pull off a shelf and say, okay, we solved that problem, and move more towards shifting mindsets, move more towards a culture where we understand that any interaction with a young person is an opportunity to build skills with them. So that gets at really what our impact is. So the result of this year-long study will be a field guide, and it'll really put together all the archives from this process and deliver them to practitioners in a way that can help them understand, okay, well, I really care about empathy, or my kid Johnny is not really great with emotion management, or he needs tools to help process a recent traumatic event. This resource will be a guide for them. And as a result, it'll also raise the profile of SEL as something that matters, is measurable, and is malleable. Because I think a prevailing impression is that these things are innate, or they're caught. So we really want to start spurring the mindset that it's something that you can teach, and it's something that we should be doing in every context. It doesn't matter whether it's a sports program, a leadership program, a computer program. These are opportunities that we have abound in all of our interactions. And then how do we then catalyze smarter investments? As Amanda was saying, it's not that we need to overhaul our systems, although that's debatable. It's that we need to perhaps think differently about what we're already doing and just shift our practices. And I don't think it should require tons more investment. I think it requires changing people's mindsets. So that's what we hope to have accomplished by the end of this project, is helping the field to understand that there are smarter ways to invest in improving youth outcomes, and that SEL might be one of those levers. Thank you.
So my name is Hassan Davis, and I am a hope dealer. I believe that every child in America deserves to be engaged, empowered, and provided a clear path to success in education, career, and community life. But unfortunately, every day in America, thousands of young people are drained from the cradle-to-career pipeline and flushed straight down the school-to-prison pipeline. Every day, almost 7,000 young people walk away from education without a diploma or equivalency And usually that last step out of the schoolhouse is their first step toward the jailhouse. The data is really clear that when young people struggle, we all struggle. When these young people engage systems, very often they become systems like the system I just left, juvenile justice systems. In fact, there's a number of important research pieces that talk about dropouts, and it's staggering. 3 different reports tell us that young people who drop out or pushed out or fail out of education meet very challenging lives. One study showed that young people who drop out are 3.5 times more likely than their high school graduating peers to be arrested, 8 times more likely to experience jail or prison. 16 to 24-year-old dropouts are 63 times more likely, I'll say that again, 63 times more likely than their high school completing, college-going peers to be institutionalized. And it's unacceptable. As an individual who ran a system, who had the ability to look at the doors going in and the very few doors going out, this is unacceptable for those of us who dream and believe ourselves to be hope dealers. So one of the things that we have to understand is there's a deep cost to doing nothing. If we continue to run as we have on autopilot and with people who say that one child, they did that one time, they did okay because they got locked up, and use that as our story, then we fail to really see the scope of our problem. In fact, if we look a little closer, there's some great data that tells us, and I'm going to show you a couple of statistics. And this is a little old data. In fact, it's probably more damaging now, but it costs about $12,000 to $13,000 a year. That's how much we spend on each child we educate in America. And we spend more than $30,000 a year on each inmate we incarcerate. Now, this is just adult. When we start to look at juvenile justice, I can tell you that for my system in Kentucky, the average annual cost for one bed was $100,000. I'll say that again. $100,000 a year to take a child out of their nurturing community with the possibility of engagement and support and put them in a box where more often than not, we're not engaging their hearts or their minds in anything different than what brought them to us. And so we need to understand that there's a clear cost when we do not do something different. Our investment in institutionalization, while a quick fix in the 90s, did not do anything to move us forward in our hopes and dreams for the young people that are going to take care of us and make this nation as great as we believe it to be. There's some really great data that talks about what happens with a simple 1-year increase in high school graduation rates. A dramatic reduction in violent crime and the most serious crimes across the country. If we were brave enough to examine and to believe in a 5% increase in just male high school graduation rates in America, we would reduce crimes to numbers like these. Now, that same 5% increase in male high school graduation rates would net us about $18.5 billion in crime-related cost reductions. I'll let that sit with you. That's a B. $18.5 billion. That's the money we spend annually. We spend annually to rebuild homes, repair lives, replace cars, build more prisons, hire more officers on the street, put more DAs in work in order to do the work that we know could be done better in community. Now, the great thing about this information is that if we had that same 5% increase, we would experience about a $1.2 billion increase in annual earnings across the country. That would be individuals having meaningful work, having great families, paying taxes, taking their babies to Chuck E. Cheese for great birthday parties, all the things we hope to experience in our communities of support. But it's not going to come without a real change in the way we look at things. And what works is the conversation we're having today. When I think about the young people that come into systems, when I think about the impact that we have, the opportunity we have, very rarely do young people who fall off the cradle-to-career pipeline find opportunity to be engaged and encouraged to get back up and to wade back in. They're very often diverted and maintained on a course that continues to go down. But this social-emotional learning stuff, this is like fire, y'all. It catches everything. And so what I'm excited about as a juvenile justice practitioner, as someone who believes that there are some young people who need to be given direction, but that does not mean they need to be removed from their community and context. This is the stuff that is really exciting me. as we continue to have the conversation. And I wanted to share this graphic with you. A colleague of Dale's, actually, from Minnesota, put together this, and it's called the 24-hour time clock of adolescence. Going from age 0 to 24, which we know now with the great brain-based research, is that range of young people's growing into their own. And the great thing about this is it overlays the Piaget, Erikson, Kohlberg, and Havinghurst, all models of development. And it puts them in this great clock that shows us exactly when young people move through these time pieces. Now, look at the third quadrant. That's the place that we focus. I think you heard Hannah say that adolescence is the time when we have to pay particular attention. When we most often drain young people from the cradle to career pipeline is the time that they need to be engaged and involved in community with strong peers who can support them in their worst times so that they can get better together. Because what the data also shows is that when we take young people and remove them from the peer circle, they become stagnant. They stop at that point. So if we take a child out at the age of 12 and we put them in 2 years of institutionalization away from their peer cohort, they are 2 years behind when we reinsert them, which creates more frustration, more angst, and more likelihood they're going to return back to that system that can at least make them feel comfortable after a time. So the question keeps coming to me, Hassan, why does this matter to you? You ran a juvenile justice system. Well, this is personal. Because before I was Commissioner of Juvenile Justice, before I was Vice Chair of the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice for the United States, advising the Congress and the President, I was a juvenile offender. I was engaged in a long range of criminal behavior with my friends and associates because there was a clear understanding as a black male child that there were some dreams I didn't have a right to have. And when I got arrested at 11 years old and my mother showed up at the police department, instead of having that angst and anger that very often accompanies a conversation, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, "Baby, if you could see what I see every time I look at you, then you would know how great you were." And after that great, bold statement, she set about engaging me and putting me into processes and programs that gave me the courage to believe I could be more. And if I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know that before I was a graduate of University of Kentucky College of Law and a graduate of Berea College, that I was expelled from alternative school after 5 years, that I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia very young, that at the age of 6 years old, living right here in St. Louis, going to Ashland Elementary School, the teachers used to lock me in the coat room because I was broken like that. And there wasn't time and energy to waste on those children who were considered disposable. And so when I talk about the possibility of hope, this isn't because I saw the Oprah Winfrey Doctor feel special, y'all. Right? This is because I have some experience with what it's like to go from challenge to chance. When people who don't have to choose to make a child's life their mission, everything changes. And what I want you to know before I leave is that these are my brothers. And that's me back in the day when I was a very different young man. But what I want you to know as I close out is that of my 3 brothers, who I consider the most brilliant individuals that I've ever had the opportunity to meet, 2 of them are serving life sentences. And my 2 brothers, Derek and Sean, in the top picture with me, Derek is my foster brother, and Sean is my stepbrother, my very best friends in the world. And I breathed my air into Derek's lungs and pumped his heart on the side of the road once for 5 minutes. And I carried my brother Sean a quarter mile on my back in the driving snow in shock with hypothermia. And I would have killed for my brothers, and I would have just as quick died for them, but I couldn't live for them. But when Sean came to live with us, and I want to tell you about him, he came with a history of abuse from his mother and her associates. And he couldn't afford to believe that he could be loved just for him. He was disconnected and disaffected. And so as we grew, and I would come home to visit from alternative school, I came home once and he was sitting in the corner of our room and he had these wires tied around his head and he was talking in a low voice. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm talking to my girl." I said, "He had wires tied around his head." And so I took it from him and there was somebody on the line. I mean, somebody spoke to me. Now, this was 1983, y'all. We didn't have telephone headsets. But I said, "Well, where did you get this?" He said, "I took that old Walkman," and some of y'all young people don't even know what a Walkman is. But before iPods, before CD players, if you had a Walkman and 20 batteries, you was good for like half a day, right? Or he said, remember that old Walkman? I took that Walkman and that broken telephone, and I started messing with him till I got some static, and I kept on going till I got a dial tone, and I called my girl. And I said, Sean, you could be one of those electric guys. That's all we had, and they were great, right? And he just started laughing. He said, no, man, this is just what I do when we're hanging out at the house. But ain't nobody going to let me do this in the real world. That's the day I learned what hopelessness was. That I realized there were young people who, even in their greatest dreams of themselves, couldn't imagine they could be more. And there were enough people out there confirming that they stopped trying. But the work that we do now is energizing to me, is hopeful to me, is very possible to me, because in order for us to shift the trajectory from this incarceration model that now we know does more damage than good, because we know now the data is clear from the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Pew Charitable Trust, who've researched this, that more young people who go into these incarceration settings have very small offenses, mostly misdemeanors, that if they were adults doing the same thing, they would be given a fine and told to show up at court. But these young people cycle through for years and years, and every time they walk through the door, it lowers their trajectory. And so we have to do something different. And I think that the key is the conversation we're having now, that we have to engage young people with their hearts in order to give them permission to engage those minds. The only child we cannot reach is the child we refuse to touch. And my name is Hassan Davis, and I am a hope dealer. And what we're asking you to do is join us in that great, great mission, because it is possible. If it wasn't, well, the truth is, I would not be here today having this conversation. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe once said that if you treat a man as he is, he will remain as he is. But if you treat a man as he can and should be, he will become as he can and should be. So this is the work. This is our greatest next opportunity to ensure that this generation of great minds don't get drained into a pipeline of no return. And it will take more than just us, but this is a good start. And so I'm so excited to be here and thankful for the hard work that has gone on to make this possible and the great possibility of what comes next. Thank you all.
I think we need to pause in the power of that moment. It's like fire, y'all. It needs to blaze in this room and throughout the region and throughout the country and the world. Thank you so much for 3 powerful perspectives on what should be a movement. We want to open up the dialogue now. We have our in-studio audience, and for those of you who have questions, we have Vanity in the back with the microphone, and she will be able to come to you. When she reaches you, please say your name, your organization, and your question. We also have questions coming in from Twitter, and so we will alternate back and forth between the audience and the Twitter feed. But I open it up to you. Right here.
Hello, my name is Romanita Hempfield. I'm a senior at Gateway High School. I'm in Wyman TLP, and I'm in TOP near Teen Southside. I have a question. How can I advocate social emotional learning in a school setting? I ask this because at school we don't talk about long-term goals, or we don't talk about our future plans in school. We don't even have real-life conversations. We don't know what to expect in the real world because there's nobody there to show us or to show that they care about us. So I was just wondering.
So to repeat the question, Romy is actually a top student, and she's a senior at Gateway High School, and her question is really around how can she, as a student, as a young person, advocate for this approach?
Like to take it? Yeah, go ahead if you want to.
Sure, I'll go. I mean, I can definitely relate to that. When I was a young person in school, it's often not the space where you really feel like you can go and be real with your peers. But I would say, honestly, that once one person makes a decision to be vulnerable and be real, then other people see that and they mirror. So I would say starting off from that place of being brave and starting those conversations yourself would really make a difference. And perhaps then you'll get the administration on board.
One of the things we're learning from research is that civic engagement and opportunities for young people to do service learning, it's often called, is one of the most important ways for people to learn as young people and to change their situation in their society and their school. So I really encourage you as young people and you as a community to think about how you build into the educational opportunities, whether in schools or youth programs or other things, the opportunity to serve a purpose greater than your own. It might be a neighborhood project, it might be a number of different things, but that's a powerful way of learning. And when you learn that way, you not only learn about the problem that you're working on, the lack of voice in the school or whatever it might be, but you also learn a number of other lessons that will carry you very far in life. The other thing, you mentioned the plans, not having plans. One of the things that the collective impact in Minnesota is doing right now is taking on the stance as a community that every child in Minneapolis and St. Paul will develop a plan for their future, and that plan for the future will be supported by at least one adult who will review it with them, go over with it, talk to them about it, help them try to find a way to make it happen. Now, that's not happening right now, but it can happen.
I'd like to underscore Dale's remarks that the research on not just service learning, but any approach that embraces social emotional learning, particularly in schools, has positive youth development as its framework. And one of the components of that is a caring adult. And those young people that have a caring adult in an authority position, that's your advocate right there. So who in your school context is advancing this, cares about you. And it's opening up that dialogue and utilizing that connection that you have with that person. We have a question over here on this side. She's right over here.
We've seen a lot of examples in St. Louis in the last month or two that have more to do with the lack of social and emotional skill among our adults and our systems than our young people. Seems to me like it's pretty hard to hold on to hope if the adults around you see you as a threat and see your voice as a potential threat. And I'd like to hear the panel address how we can create a different conversation among the adults that makes room for young people.
That's Faith Sandler with the Scholarship Foundation and asking us a really hard question. I think Hassan might be able to kick us off.
I think it's a great question, and without a doubt, adults are definitely struggling with the social emotional learning thing. I think a big part of it, this conversation we even had, is that even when we talk in the broad spectrum about youth development and social emotional learning, we're most often talking about training adults. Young people get this, and so it really is learning how to take our filters down so that they can actually get to what they understand how to do. And maybe the answer is we need to be much more intentional about engaging adults in the community in courageous conversations and the opportunity to really build their own tool belt of competencies around social emotional learning. And the truth is we have to unpack, 50 years of history, that taught them that this was the only reaction they could have in an environment that is set stagnant for so long. So I think it's a long-term goal to have conversation. And the great thing is we continue to bring young people along who are much more adept at having the conversation to help us mediate the adults who sometimes need more supervision.
Dale?
Most of the efforts to improve social and emotional learning really do focus on the adults. You've got to do the professional development. Most teachers, particularly secondary teachers, high school, middle school teachers, will say, I've never been trained to teach this. It's not a part of what it is. We have such an overemphasis on the achievement side that we have underemphasized in our preparation of teachers, our preparation of others, of how to understand and deal with emotions, their own as well as those they're working with. And so you're right on target. Again, remember, social emotional learning is both caught and taught. And so if you're catching it in a whole bunch of ways from people who aren't as good at it, you're going to catch things that aren't going to help you very well. One of my colleagues, Derek Peterson, talks about 5 anchors in a young person's life, 5 people. And those 5 people have to string together supports for that young person in one way or another, either directly or individually. And when they do that, it creates a mat that young person can bounce on and rise up from. Right now, too many of our young people have 5 anchor points, and they're under the mat. And that anchor points are holding them down because there are people who are struggling themselves in many ways to succeed. We did a study years ago in a rural area. As the number of adults went up in a kid's life, the kid did better. In an urban inner city area, as the number of adults went up in the life, the kids did worse. Why? The adults were unemployed, on the street, in drug trafficking areas and other things. They were not positive role models. It's not whether you have an adult. It's whether you have an adult who cares and an adult who's got their act together in some fundamental way. You don't have to be perfect, and heaven knows none of us are, but you have to be able to be a constructive force in the child's life, not just a destructive force. And far too often we have both of those.
Vanity?
We have a question coming in from our live stream audience. Elizabeth Pickard asks, what are the commonalities among programs that elevate SEL skills? So, for example, are some types in the arts or sports, etc., more advanced than others?
Hannah, do you have a perspective on that?
You know, I could say from sort of conventional wisdom or sort of what we've seen anecdotally is often that the arts-based programs and the more informal learning programs tend to be able to have the leverage or the latitude to really focus more on SEL. But it's because they're focusing on it systemically and structurally. So I wouldn't say it's because they have the magic and others don't. But we also know that there are features. There was a meta-analysis of after-school programs that came out a few years ago that showed that programs that had the SAFE features that Dale mentioned, sequenced, active, focused and explicit, those were the programs that tended to see more of those outcomes. So it's less about the vehicle and less about the content and more about just using that content as a vehicle.
There's a lot of, as we think about how to do social emotional learning in schools particularly, we're learning that there's a lot of ways you can do social emotional learning in math classes. So this isn't about taking an hour block a day and say, let's all talk about our emotions. This is about demonstrating in the way you run your class, the way you engage young people, the way you build a team, how you get young people helping each other when they have a problem they're working on. There's a video on YouTube by a teacher demonstrating how he works in his classroom. That's, I would say, not only good math teaching, but just as importantly and more importantly, good social emotional teaching. And so the notion that we have to segregate this over here and do it and have somebody who's specialized in it. We have to help people understand it. We have to help people be intentional about it. We do need to help adults think about it differently, become more intentional. But this is not an area where we should go figure out how we hire an SEL professional to do the job we all have to do as parents, citizens, neighbors, coaches, teachers, youth workers. It's a part of young people develop these social emotional things from their daily diet of the experiences they have and the people they're with. If that diet is toxic, if that environment is toxic, the kid is going to struggle. If the diet is strong with caring people, constructive places for them to be, challenging possibilities that expect of them rather than less of them, you get better results across the board.
Question here at the front.
Stand up. Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Erica Tyson. I'm with Wyman. I have a question. Actually, my question is actually for Dale Blythe, but I would like to thank you, Hassan, for making me want to jump up and shout. But my question for you, Dale Blythe, you mentioned the wellness, the well-being index that looked at community-wide, the state of the youth there. Can you talk a little bit about that? How was it used? Were there community conversations after that? I've never heard of anything like that. So can you talk a little bit more about what happened after those measurements were taken?
Yeah. This is done out of the University of British Columbia, and it's also been done by Search Institute in the Asset Framework, 40 Developmental Assets. And what you do is you talk to the community about why. Why is it some kids are doing well? Why are some kids not doing well? What's our community missing? So you start looking at the data to start thinking about what might we do differently. So in one community in Minnesota, they looked at the data and realized that the young people in the community didn't have caring adults they knew. And so the older citizens in the community started an Adopt a Bus Stop program where senior citizens came out to the bus stop and helped young people just talk about their day or do things and just gave a warm presence to them. And in Minnesota, that's not easy to do in the winter. And so there's lots of little things. So you start talking about a different conversation. Too often when we try to do community organizing from outside, we spend all the community's energy trying to figure out what we should do. And what you really have to spend your energy is on how to do it. Because we generally know what to do. You get data, these data that I was talking about show you a little bit about what's wrong, but how you do that in your community, how you respond is very different. One of the things I learned over time, and I think this is very important because it's the exact opposite of what we do. We generally think a crisis motivates people to action. If we can drive people by fear, they'll act faster. What I learned in talking to communities is the exact opposite. If you drive it to crisis, they look to somebody else to solve the problem, or they think of it as a short-term problem that once we get over the crisis, we don't have to worry about it. These things aren't short-term crises. These are long-term. And when you go to the other side, communities that found out that they had their kids had an absence of strengths that they needed, the caring adults in their life, a connection to school. When the absence of good things was visible to them, they got mobilized. They said, we can't tolerate this. If it's a drug problem, we got drug people to handle that, or the police. But if they don't have caring adults in their life, wait a second, I can do something about that. And so using those asset-based approaches, the strength-based approaches is part of what you do. So you want to put data in front of communities that help them not only see the problems and the size of the problems, but see the strengths of young people and the strengths they don't have, but that we all know they need. And that begins to do it. So it's about conversations about how do we mobilize around these things more than it is about the magnitude of the problem that we so often do when we release data on communities.
In the back.
Hi, it's Stephanie Krause with the Forum for Youth Investment. I am so excited that we are having this conversation in my community. The Forum for Youth Investment, as you three know, has been deeply engaged in this work. And the community here really has the capacity to, I think, lead nationally in getting this done. So it's a sweet blend of both of my worlds, so thank you. Can you speak to some of the priorities and challenges that surround the spread and scale of this work and doing this work in a quality way as we move it forward?
I could tap in on that. I would say that one of the primary challenges is that people have so many different ways of approaching this. As I mentioned before, it's idiosyncratic. So everyone has their own memory. Or what was your pivotal moment? What was your transformational experience? And that really gets projected onto then how to approach that with young people. And that's a good thing. You want to support the fact that people feel internally motivated to do this kind of work. But then how do you do that with fidelity? That's a huge challenge that we're really trying to tap away at. I think that the youth development movement, as it was decades ago, really did a good job at sort of saying what are the contexts that help young people grow and develop. But we haven't focused enough on then what are the results of that? What do we expect young people to be able to do once we set up these contexts? So the challenge then is for us to sort of agree conceptually about what those skills are. You don't necessarily have to agree about every single definition or every single bucket of sort of theorizing about it, but we have to be able to agree that these are important things and that we have to cultivate our workforces to be able to even help young people through that. So as the woman was posing before, the challenge is that we haven't created the conditions in our systems that make adults have the capacity to do this well. So that's the biggest challenge, is really each one teach one, the adults and also the youth.
What I would say is that when we surveyed leaders of various types in Minnesota, and I think it would be relatively similar in most places, we found that social emotional learning is not very central for schools. So it's still seen over on the side, beside achievement. That's got to change if it's got to become one of the strands of the rope that actually you weave together to get young people to be successful. So you've got to start thinking about it as mainstream, not side stream, or whatever the analogy is. I'm not sure side stream's a word. In Minnesota, in the collective impact effort in the Twin Cities, I'm chairing a task force right now that I was trying to say, you've got 5 great goals as a community. You want kids ready for kindergarten, you want them reading by 3rd grade, you want them math proficient by 8th grade, you want them to graduate from high school, and you want them to be college and career ready, and things like that. We have nothing in any of those except a little bit in the Ready for Kindergarten that talks about social emotional learning. We seem to recognize young people need a balanced life. We seem to forget that after they're in the early grades. And so we're now creating a 6th goal that the leadership will vote on, mayors and superintendents will vote on in January, around all 7th graders are socially and emotionally equipped to learn and to persist in their learning. And we aren't going to succeed at that any more than we succeed at reading by 3rd grade immediately. But if we get our act together collectively in a community kind of way, and we recognize it, it's got to get up there so it's visible and valued and viable. We can do something about it. We know it can be done, but we're missing on the valued and the visible part. It's still too assumed to be things. One of the things we learned when we talked about, when we had a Frameworks Institute come in and talk about youth development and programs, is that people get brain development, but they don't get social development. Social development happens naturally. So you don't have to do much with a natural process. But in point of fact, it happens out of intentionality. And if it happens positively, it's intentional positive. If it happens negatively, it's being ignored too often. And so I think there's a lot of those types of things that we have to be aware of and move these kind of things not from the sidelines over here, but into the mainstream of what we care about, what we think makes a difference, and how we work on it both individually and collectively as a community.
I'd like to say that if SEL is side stream in education, it's a dry well in juvenile justice. It's a conversation that is absolutely not happening. And so one of the things that we know are these young people who fall into the system are most likely the ones who need that engagement more. And so part of the conversation we're having as juvenile justice leaders is how do we backtrack from this sense that corrections is the work of juvenile justice. It's a very adult model that came about in the 90s with the advent of the super predator and the tough on crime, but it is clearly not the model that we started with. The intent of juvenile justice systems was to protect young people from punitive systems that punish them every day instead of helping them repair themselves and move forward. And we've somehow convinced ourselves, because it's much easier work, it's much cheaper to have someone that sits and looks at a child and says, sit down and shut up and do what I told you to do, instead of engaging a child in where are you and how do we get you to where you dream of being. And so I think the conversation for this sector is so much larger and requires a demand from the greater community, because a lot of folks think this is their job and think this is the only expectation we have for children who fall out, that they don't get back in, they don't get back up. And until that misperception is cured, we're not going to get to the real work of integrating real engagement for young people so that they're prepared when they come out of these systems to go back in with their peers and be successful on the back end.
We've got to balance report cards with support cards.
Well, I like that.
And we don't have it right now. It's out of balance.
A question in the front and then one more in the back.
Hi, my name is Karen Kalish. I'm founder and executive director of Homeworks, the teacher home visit program. And if you all didn't read the front page of the paper today, please do. There were reports done on racism and education in 1969 that could have been written today. There's a report that was written about the racism and ignoring communities in '89 that could have been written today, 1989. I'm wondering how, if any of you all have, many of us know each other in the room because we always show up because we care about this so much. But did any of you have any success in your communities of getting the people in the room at the table who don't normally come, who need to be there? We all need allies. We cannot do this by ourselves. We need allies. Have you all had any success in your communities in getting those people to the table?
There are, it's hard work. It does happen in places. The Forum for Youth Investment has done it and worked with communities in a number of places. Search Institute's been doing it with communities and others. You've got multiple kinds of bringing people to the table. You've got to bring the various professionals and service sectors together, so the juvenile justice sector and the others, and that requires somehow a data or other kind of problem that's defined as not in a silo. As long as we continue to define our problems as siloed, we will continue to not progress. That's one of the things I like about social emotional learning. It's not in a silo. Social emotional learning is not to be left up to the guidance counselors or schools, or the school psychologist, or the school social worker. It's something the community has to work on, and the families have to work on, and they have to do it together. And that's the other thing. You have to get beyond the professionals. You have to get to the parents, the coaches, the others in the community. And that, again, I would argue, happens more when you stop thinking about it as a crisis to be solved, though there are often real crises, and more as a how do we support the positive things kids need and are missing in their lives. It's not an easy task. I wish I could say there are 3 things that you do, but it's not at all easy. We have to invest in relationships, because relationships are the way communities work when they work. It's the way youth development works when it works. It's the way social emotional learning happens when it works. But we don't want to pay for that. We want to find the shortcut, the quick solution. And those aren't likely to be in any sector. They're going to be across sector. They're going to be both mobilizing the larger community to work on the issues as well as the professional community.
We have one final question here at the front. Joanne.
I have a broken shoulder, so this will be quick. I am the executive director of the S.A.F.E Foundation. I want to thank everybody here. But I want to say that we come here every year, and I was so impressed tonight with your talk. All 3 of you did a wonderful job, and you've given us food for thought in a time that St. Louis is going through right now. We're very grateful to have you and your ideas. I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with that, we have come to the close of our time, and I want to offer a few reflections across the speakers and the questions here. It's interesting to me, I think very much in the show me state, we're looking for the next intervention, the next way to fix this, and what we've heard tonight is it's more about approach and mindset than anything else, and that context matters a lot. It's about the ecosystem we wrap around our children. It's about the soup, if you will. It's about building those allies so this truly does become community-wide and systemic. I would like to end moderator's prerogative with one final question to you all, so you have the last word. So if we have bought into this mindset and we leave here today, what's the one thing we should do? What should we prioritize?
Well, I don't know that there's a clear priority, but I think at the top of the list ought to be having more earnest conversation with the folks that aren't here. I think speaking to that sense of allies, we have to start seeking out unlikely allies, and we have to start using the data that we now have that is very clear and very strong, from the research to the numbers and the clear dollar signs, to let people know that this really is their problem, even though it doesn't seem like their problem at all. And when we're brave enough as advocates to have that conversation out loud, instead of just with the folks that already know and nod their head with us and commiserate, then we're going to have the opportunity to really start to turn, because the data is a powerful ally for us.
Yeah, I would say each of us individually has relationships in our families, in our neighborhood, in our professional lives. And what I would say to you is go viral. Talk about this. Talk about it with people that you might not think even would understand it or care about it. Because it is about a fundamental aspect of being human that people can relate to. There are very few things I could explain about what I did in my life professionally that I could talk to my mother about that she would either care about or understand. It was always too academic, too statistical or something. This was something she understood. Talk to people. Help people see the importance of this. Help them remind them of the importance in their own life. And remind them this doesn't happen without intentionality. If you're not deliberate about it, development happens. They'll get social and emotional skills. They just may not be the ones you want.
Hannah?
No, I would totally reiterate what they said. And also, it doesn't come down to that individual practitioner or that individual educator. It comes down to us to create the conditions, to make it so that, we're building capacity, but, take it down to what that really means. We're making it so that people have support to do their jobs. So instead of saying, here are all the new charges that you have to meet your expectations in your work, here's the support for helping you do that. And I think that's really what capacity building means, and I think that's what this SCL piece is going to take. It's going to take really investing in the support that adults will need to help young people succeed.
Join me in thanking our panel. I'm delighted now to turn the program over to the person who sprinkled embers all over St. Louis and helped to fire blaze for this movement, Dave Hilliard, the CEO and president of Wyman.
I have a lot of thank yous to make. First, to our friends at the S.A.F.E Foundation. I know you'll find a spot on the wall for this little memento. They think about our children in this community every day in so many ways. We are so fortunate that the legacy Fred Saigh left here and the work that the staff and the trustees of the S.A.F.E Foundation do. So thank you for making this an annual opportunity, but your daily work. We're so grateful for that. Jack, I can't thank you and the 9 Network enough. One of the great gifts that we have here in St. Louis is a collective voice. We have a media station here who said, we won't be the voice for our own interest, but rather we'll be the voice for the community interest. You're pioneering, you're courageous, and you're generous in that, and thank you. And Bridget, Bridget Flood, who has supported this event annually, the Brown School, and Amanda for your generosity. We thank you. All the funders in the room who are here to hear this message, I hope you paid attention. Thank you. We have a generous community, but we do have work to do. I want to thank Dale and Hannah and Hassan for their messages today, their work all year round. It's so important. It resounds with all of us in this room. I could tell by the questions. My takeaway is that the first work we have to do is really new work for lots of us. We have been the practitioners in the field, or we've been the funders, but we haven't been the advocates. We haven't been the persistent voice for what we know is good and right and best for all of our young people. We have been for the young people in our programs, but not for all young people. We have been with the stakeholders who support us and lead us in our boards, in our funding communities, but there are large swaths of this community who are not engaged in this very important conversation. And for the change that we all want to happen, for every young person to have these opportunities that I describe as these core developmental formation opportunities to become who they want to be and to live how they want to live, we've got to have conversations with people we don't normally have conversations with, and they need to be uncomfortable conversations because not all of our kids are getting what they need. So especially if you look like me, an old white guy who lived privileged all of his life, I need to recognize that. I need to own up to where I am is because of the privilege that I had. And I need to be an advocate for every young person, regardless of color or economic circumstance, to get the kinds of supports that I had. And I know I'm speaking to the crowd here, but the choir here, but the choir needs to go out and sing loudly and bravely as we go forth. Let's wrap this up by inviting Hassan to offer us some closing thoughts.
Share a piece that I wrote, unfortunately, more than 20 years ago on the heels of Rodney King and Bernie Goetz, and it seems to have become as appropriate now as it ever has. It's called Visions. The bat fell fast and hard against my back and my head. My vision blurred, then focused, and blurred, then focused on the object of my pain and fear. I wake trembling in the pool of sweat. And on the television, the source of my pain brought to me in living color. See, somewhere a little black boy is being shot to death and no one seems to give a damn. And somewhere a white man is being beaten and battered in the name of some obscene justice. These are the images introducing me to a new world order. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Our great ideas may not survive such a storm. Somewhere stereotypes have been passed to a child who has never seen me. A belief in the natural ignorance of color. A belief that justice is and should be based on the shades of one's darkness. Somewhere a child like me who grew up tired and hungry on these streets has had his greatest fear come to life. The fear that his pain matters less than any other's. The fear that his struggle for equality guarantees him no respect. Somewhere our children, black and white, native and immigrant, have been led to ruin because justice has turned her blind eye on their tears. And with these thoughts to torment me, I drift painfully back to sleep. But in this dream, there is a weapon in my hands, and in this dream there is a white man chained and thrown at my feet, and in this dream he starts to curse me, goading me into what he knows must be my next act. But he looks surprised as I raise that weapon high above my head and bring it down, and again down upon these chains that have held us ignorant so long. And then I extend my hand. So now as we start our journey toward understanding, he will learn that he can rest his tired weight on strong black shoulders. And now as we start our trek toward the truth, I will learn that I can trust blue eyes to guard my back. And now as we start our pilgrimage toward unity, we will learn that justice is still alive. We will learn that just us, few people, have the power to restore this beauty's righteous sight. And these are my visions for all of you, my people. Visions.